Yeah, so I'm going to talk for a few minutes and then we'll have some time for practice and then a little bit of time for kind of open conversation between us, if you care to, anyway. So anyway, I've mentioned before in here, I think in the last couple of months or so, that I'm taking this course called A Year to Live, and I'm halfway through. It's a year-long course. And it's based on the book by Stephen Levine of the same name, A Year to Live. The book and the course are about meditating on death as a way of living life more fully right now. So I'm doing the course for my own personal reflection and for my meditation practice. But I'm also doing it to help us here at the Mindfulness Center shape a collection of new offerings that we're putting together that we're calling the Mindful Mortality Project. So in addition to reading Levine's book and taking this course, which includes several meditations and guided imagery to support this kind of reflecting on death and life, and we meet for large group teachings, and then we're also assigned to small group, small discussion groups. And we have the same group for the duration of the year. So last week, my small discussion group, we were talking about the challenges of doing the homework, especially this one assignment that's called a life review. In the life review, you take a comprehensive look at your own life as a way to get in touch with it and with some sense of gratitude for what you've been given and how you've been able to live this life, but also to consider what's most important to you and how you might refocus your life now on living a way that really is what you're intending to do. And then finding a way to live from that place for however much life you have left. So it's a very kind of dynamic and also at times intense practice. Everyone in our small group who shared about their process of going through the life review and all also mentioned how in looking back on their lives and considering the ending of their lives, that they all had some form of regret coming up. And I shared the same struggle with them. In the book, Levine tells the story of sitting with people who were approaching death, who knew they were dying, and they were all talking about a similar kind of sadness or regret that they were experiencing. It was not simply about the fear and the suffering around death. The regret was about feeling that they had kind of postponed their life. One man spoke of the great admission that I was going to die a failure, my dream unrealized. The people Levine accompanied were suffering not simply because they were dying. Many were suffering because they believed they had not really become enough in their life, not accomplished enough, were not recognized enough, were not successful enough, whatever that meant to them, success. In other words, the deepest pain wasn't death or dying. It was the story that they had been telling themselves and holding on to throughout their lives. I'll finally be enough when I, whatever it is, succeed in my field at work, or when I retire, or when I find the right relationship, when people start appreciating me, when life turns out differently, then I'll really start living. In the book, Levine asks whether we spend much of our lives chasing what he calls some trophy of our worthiness. The question of regret, especially regrets around not living an intentional life and thereby craving more, does not only show up in meditation groups. We see this addressed in modern psychology too. There's an approach to psychology called acceptance and commitment therapy. And that has found that people flourish not by waiting for life to go my way or to get what I want, but by living according to my deepest values today, even in the presence of disappointment or pain or uncertainty or fear. A longtime hospice nurse, Bronnie Ware, she's an Australian author and songwriter and motivational speaker, as well as hospice nurse. And she's probably best known for her writings about deathbed regrets. And she describes them in her book, The Top 5 Regrets of the Dying. In it, we're observed that the most common regrets of the people she worked with who were nearing death were not about were about not having lived authentically enough, and not expressing their feelings enough, and not staying connected to friends as much as they would have liked to, and not allowing themselves really just to be happier and at peace. While her book is essentially kind of an anecdotal representation of these regrets, her observations closely mirror decades of psychological research on regret that were well summarized by Daniel Pink. Daniel Pink is an American nonfiction writer, has authored 7 New York Times bestsellers, and he wrote a book, The Power of Regret, How Looking Backward Moves Us Forward. I think that research and the book where he kind of collected all that research is particularly valuable to this discussion, because he does not simply offer personal observations. He kind of synthesizes what was really more than 50 years of psychological research on regret, along with survey data from 26,000 people, 105 countries. So it's a broad brush and a broad look at regret across traditions and cultures. And in that research found that people's deepest regrets are rarely about wealth, status, or possessions. Instead, they center on missed opportunities to be more courageous or more authentic in their living, to be in meaningful relationships, and living in accordance with one's deepest values. Pink says that essentially people intrinsically want to do things that matter. People want to make a difference in their life and know that their life has made a difference for others. It doesn't have to be in a big way either, some big famous way or something. So after analyzing thousands of regrets, Daniel Pink concluded that most regrets fall into 4 broad categories. See if any of these kind of ring true for you. The 4 core regrets. The first one is foundation regrets. These arise when we neglect the basic habits that support a healthy life, a foundational kind of thing. Examples include wasn't wise with my money. I neglected my health. I failed to develop good habits, or I procrastinated most of my life, So he calls those foundation regrets. And then the other category is boldness regrets. People regret that they didn't go far than what they did, further than what they did. They weren't bold in their assertion and kind of living life. And simple things, not telling someone that you love them, very freely, or not pursuing meaningful work, or avoiding, risks and not taking reasonable chances in your life, kind of going for it. The third area or category that Pink, sort of established is moral regrets. People regret moments when they violated their own value system. Examples might be like, they were dishonest when they valued honesty, or betrayal, selfishness, hurting another person. And these were not so much failures about achievement, doing things. They were failures of integrity. And the fourth final category is connection regrets. People often regret relationships that they allowed to kind of fade away, with family, friends, estranged siblings or others, old companions that they sort of let go of. And sometimes we need to do that in terms of sheer numbers of people. But many people later realize I could have reached out. I could have, called on them once in a while, but I didn't. So to summarize his research, Pink argues that regret is not something to avoid, but something to learn from. He writes, regret can improve our lives. It's one of our most powerful emotions if we treat it properly. Pink's thesis is that if we allow regret to be present so that we might see it for what it is and what it represents, And if we can do that with a level of kind of kindness and understanding about ourselves and without harsh judgment, then we may be able to really be present to the entirety of our lives and make real changes when they're available to us and live the life that we want to live. Of course, this is starting to sound remarkably like mindfulness and the practice that rather than denying regret or becoming consumed by it, we can turn toward it with curiosity, allowing it to clarify what matters most for us. And mindfulness offers us the possibility of not waiting for some imagined future before allowing ourselves to live fully and to live with gratitude and love and presence. Mindfulness says, do it now, in the now. The Buddha observed that life involves pain and dissatisfaction. It's going to be there. Aging, illness, loss, and death are unavoidable. And so we suffer. And much of our suffering, the Buddha said, is intensified by craving and believing that lasting happiness depends on acquiring, avoiding, or controlling our experiences. That's the root of our suffering. In mindfulness-based stress reduction, which was very well explained and animated in Buddhism, yet it's also described in other spiritual traditions. We would say in mindfulness-based stress reduction that craving or holding on and or rejecting and pushing away are at the root of our suffering. That's what brings suffering, not the particular events. And so we practice non-judgmental awareness that helps us to be free from suffering by being maybe even just a little bit less invested in things needing to be one way or another before we're willing to be present into our lives. Helping one another to live with less judgment and therefore less suffering so that we might embrace life more fully is, I would say, is the overall aspiration of the Mindfulness Center of Atlanta. And it lies at the heart of our new Mindful Mortality project. We're discovering that reflecting on mortality isn't primarily about preparing for death. That's part of it, but really it's more about learning how to live more intentionally, more compassionately, and more fully awake and alive while we're still here in whatever shape we're in. So just saying, in closing these comments, in his book, A Year to Live, Levine uses the image of the lotus, a flower that grows from muddy water. He uses it to remind us that wisdom doesn't appear after life becomes perfect. It grows through the very conditions, often cloudy conditions, that we often wish were absent in our lives. And then he says, find your lotus before winter. In other words, don't wait until the end of life to discover what really matters. Don't wait. Don't wait to forgive. Don't wait to say thank you. Don't wait to tell someone you love them. Don't wait to become present to the life that's already here. So with that, let's engage in the practice that helps us to be free and to live fully without clinging and without rejecting. So we'll sit for a few minutes and then we'll have some time for some conversation. And if you're new here, we'll go through the guidelines. And if you're not new here, it's always good to hear this again as a reminder of what we're doing when we sit here in silence in a particular way, in an intentional way. We're sitting with awareness and non-judgment in the present moment. So that starts with the body by establishing a posture that supports this being fully present, or as present as you're able at this moment. So that's usually expressed with a sense of grounding in the low body, getting your feet or legs flat on the floor or on the cushion. Or if you're standing, just kind of rooting in at the bottoms of the feet. And if you're sitting, feeling the sit bones in the chair or on the floor. So it's a sense of arriving and grounding. And then lengthening up through the spine. So there's also an uplift. So let the spine be relatively straight. It's not absolutely straight. And lengthen all the way up through the back of the neck and the back of the head. And then without tilting the head, just closing the eyes or just directing the gaze downward without tilting the head. So there's a softening of your gaze. And let the hands come to rest, maybe palms facing down or up on the legs, or gathered together one on top of the other in the lap. And then we'll let the breath be our anchor point, our present moment object of awareness to attend to bring the mind back to each and every time we notice it wandering off. And it will. It will wander off. It's inevitable. The mind will wander. It wanders. That's what it does. Thoughts show up, emotions show up, physical sensations show up, memories, storylines, plans, going back in time and reviewing, going ahead and planning. All that's fine. It's nothing criminal about that, It's just that we're practicing being present in the present, real time. So when you notice the mind doing all that or getting pulled into an emotion, just do your best to release it, come back. And the guidance is not to suppress anything that's showing up, and just acknowledge it, thinking, planning, remembering, and then let it go. And that's the strength of the practice, is the releasing once you see what's happening and coming back to the moment. And each time you notice that wandering of the mind or that getting pulled in on certain things, you just gently guide the attention back to the breath and the body sitting here. And doing so with an attitude of kindness and compassion and friendliness. This is the heart of the practice, to return, to notice that it's gone off, and then to return willingly, or kicking and screaming, either way. Notice where the mind is right now. Notice where the heart is. And gather them together and just return to the moment by becoming aware of the breath. Very handy present moment orienting object of awareness, because we can only take this breath in and this breath out. And let it be a light touch. We're not wrestling the mind to come back, just inviting it back to the breath. Here's a poem by Mary Oliver, a very popular poem, The Summer Day. Who made the world? Who made the swan and the black bear? Who made the grasshopper? This grasshopper, I mean. The one who has flung herself out of the grass. The one who is eating sugar out of my hand. Who is moving her jaws back and forth instead of up and down. Who is gazing around with her enormous and complicated eyes. Now she lifts her pale forearms and thoroughly washes her face. Now she snaps her wings open and floats away. I don't know exactly what a prayer is, but I do know how to pay attention, how to fall down into the grass, how to kneel down in the grass, how to be idle and blessed, how to stroll through the fields, which is what I have been doing all day. Tell me, what else should I have done? Doesn't everything die at last and too soon? Tell me what it is you plan to do with your one wild and precious life.